So if you were thinking, man, I really want to hear what Hollywood has to say about politics right now, well, there is no time like the present, okay? Because just look at all the celebrities who are getting behind Kamala, right? You got George Clooney, you got Cardi B. But today on the podcast, how much is a celebrity endorsement really worth? I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud. This is Commotion. All right, so we're talking about a lot more support than just people sharing the I'm with her hashtag, okay? Like Kamala's got Beyonce and Meg Thee Stallion up on her soundtrack for the campaign. She's got big donors like George Clooney and Oprah backing her up. And then there's these steady stream of stars popping off on Zoom rallies, right? Like the dude, Jeff Bridges, showed up at White Dudes for Harris. Jane Fonda showed up at Elders for Kamala. And then there's Nick Offerman, who showed up at Comedians for Kamala and serenaded us with this.
So I'm proud to be a Kamala man who has quit the GOP. 'Cause I just can't abide a man who's tried for 34 felonies.
So the stars, as out of tune as they may be, are here for Kamala, but will all these celebrity endorsements translate into votes on Election Day? Brea Baker is back with us, and she's got thoughts. Hi, Brea.
Hey, so good to be here.
So good to meet you. Okay, look, Brea, like celeb endorsements, they're nothing new, and you've been following this game for a long time. But is this something that have you seen it like this before?
Yes and no. We're definitely living in, there's always some unprecedented times, and there's nothing new under the sun. When Obama first ran in 07, 08, we saw that outpouring for him. We also saw that for Hillary Clinton, who during the primaries running against him and had more establishment support. And then, once he became the nominee, though, there's Young Jeezy making rap songs. There's Lil Wayne doing remixes of A Milli. And so there was a lot of cultural energy around Obama, and that being really driven by celebrities and people in positions of power saying we have to take advantage of this moment. And I think we saw the same thing when Hillary Clinton ran. A lot of celebrity support, especially from women in Hollywood. I think what we're now seeing, though, is a much more condensed version. So it's making it a lot more obvious that the endorsements are coming out like dozens each day, that Charlie XCX can call Kamala Harris brat one day, and then that's like consuming media for the next few days. So I think because it's so condensed, and by the nature of her getting into the race as the candidate so late in this game, we're just seeing it all squished into a few weeks span.
Right. So just taking us by storm, basically.
Exactly.
But look, Kamala, she's always been very accomplished, right? But, we didn't really see this kind of support until Joe Biden dropped out of the race. Are you surprised that she's become a magnet for just all kinds of celebrities, like the wide swath of them?
I'm not. And I think it speaks to how scary and frustrating Trump's ascent has been. And that in spite of all of the mess ups and all of the racism and the misogyny and the, his vice presidents and people he's appointed now denouncing him, he's still allowed to take up so much space in the GOP. I think people were so frustrated, but Biden was so unappealing that it was like anything either than these two was going to excite people. And so even though this is not how it went for Kamala Harris when she ran for president in 2020, and certainly not how it was initially after she was made the VP, people were just excited for it to be not Biden and not Trump. So that I think that speaks to the desperation that people are feeling and how excited they are to jump onto someone new. And if Kamala Harris plays her cards right and the campaign is effective, they'll be able to translate some of that initial energy into actual excitement for their vision and their plan. So we can't really rest our laurels on the endorsements, but it's definitely been a really great fundraising strategy for them.
Well, yeah. So like when you talk about that, because it's not just the volume of the endorsements, right? It's the impact they're having in this, or not necessarily the impact, but the reach. Like you mentioned Charlie XCX calling Kamala brat, and then all of a sudden lime green became the color of the summer. Like that is reach, okay? But then how as far as them reaching their audience, like how important are these endorsements in terms of actually like these early days of the presidential campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what she needs in these early stages are visibility and amplification more than anything, because again, you're racing against time. The opposition has been building a campaign for much longer. And yes, she's been on the ticket, but it's very different being someone else's vice versus like establishing a narrative and a vision that puts you at the center. And so she's got to do all of that in about 100 days. And she's got to do it well enough for people to trust her, and not because they trust the person she chose as VP, but because they actually trust her. And so the endorsements are really good for putting her in front of a wide range of audiences, young voters, women, people of color, Black people specifically, of various genders, people who are also ideologically in different spaces. It just puts them in front of her. And so that's a really important first step, again, for fundraising, but then also for the name recognition and reminding people that this is no longer a Biden-Trump campaign. This is a Harris-Trump campaign, and who's going to come out on top in that sense. But again, she can't spend the whole 100 days just trying to get visibility. She has to translate the visibility and the reach into organic energy for her. It can't just be that Beyonce fans are like, oh, Beyonce, like that's, 3 months from now, we're not going to still be talking about the fact that Kamala Harris did Freedom for the campaign video. Like it'll fizzle out after a while, and people will be left in the ashes wondering, wait, was there ever a platform? Was there ever a real campaign, or was it all smoke and mirrors? So we don't want it to get to a place where people become resentful of the endorsements because there's nothing behind it.
Right. So then for those celebrities who are doing the endorsements then, and who are making her visible right now, what for the next 100 days is their job?
I think for some of the celebrities, I think it's going to depend on so many different aspects of who they are as people. I think for the more visible, but also more controversial and elite of the celebrities, it's kind of like open up your wallets and step out of the way. I don't think that the campaign should be leaning on them to be surrogates or stumping for her, because the reality is that she's already being painted as this sort of coastal elite California, out of touch person. And so for her to get battleground states, and specifically in Middle America, our favorite phrase, she's going to need to prove that she is accessible and thinking about people. And again, celebrity endorsements will only take her so far. For a lot of those Middle America people, they're going to be like, what do I care what George Clooney thinks of a president? Because George Clooney and I live very different lives. Same for some of those other people. But there are some celebrities who occupy this kind of quasi-activist state, where either the work and the projects that they've done are very politically and touch on politics and specific issues or their lives, and they've become advocates for those issues. Those people, I think, can be really powerful champions and to both be funders but also storytellers for the campaign. But I really think Kamala's going to need to lean into the everyday person, the union leaders, the people who were just on strike all year last year, we got to bring in families of those impacted by police violence and immigration, and talk about what policies she has that's going to look different from the last 4 years. Because if people were as excited about the last 4 years, Biden wouldn't have needed to drop out.
Right. I mean, when you were talking about the coastal elites and stuff in Hollywood, do you feel like that is actually so that it sounds like you're saying that could also work against her in terms of some voters, especially when you got George Clooney. I think he lives in a villa in Italy, and he's meddling in Toronto, in U.S. politics. But yeah, then talk to me then about is there actually any evidence that celebrity endorsements actually that they translate into votes?
No, we don't really have that, because I think we have a wide range of case studies with their own variables. And so there are some success stories and there's some not. Obama was very successful with the celebrity endorsements that he had because it worked with his personality. He was this suave man who had been doing a lot of work in Chicago, and so having celebrity endorsement kind of matched his clout that he already was exuding. For Hillary Clinton, people felt like she was being forced onto them, and it was sort of like you're insisting that she be someone that I love, and it was like I got hot sauce in my bag moment, and whether it's true or not, I don't believe it, but it didn't. But the fact that it didn't feel believable is just as telling as whether it was true or not. The fact that people didn't believe it and felt pandered to meant that the more that celebrities came out for her and insisted on the I'm with her, the more it felt like a us versus them thing. And celebrity activism is in this some days it's working, some days it's not. People don't always want to talk to a person who lives in a villa in Italy and has a secondary home in LA for when they're filming and has a condo in Atlanta for when they're filming. Like, that's not someone that they want to hear about policy from all the time. And so that's something to remember, is that it definitely can backfire. It works in certain areas and it definitely works as a fundraising strategy, but it can't be the only strategy. And trying to just have celebrity endorsements and hope that that energy can sustain us for the next 100 days would be a misfire.
Well, it's speaking of misfires and all of this stuff, like she's literally got hundreds of celebrities, from all different backgrounds jumping on the Kamala bandwagon, right? But Trump also has like Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock, but also Amber Rose and Sexy Red. And look, they're not exactly A-listers, right? But I'm just curious, how are those celebrity endorsements then working for Trump, for the Trump campaign?
Yeah. So kind of like the example of Obama that I gave, of where the celebrity endorsements really worked because it leaned into his personality. The Trump endorsements really lean into his as well. Trump tries to position himself, despite being a multi-millionaire with failed businesses and bankrupt. Like, he tries to position himself as both a elite businessman who is like better than everyone else, but also like a misfit who is trying to fight for other misfits. And so the more that he brings in celebrities that are also kind of seen as misfits, like Roseanne, it's kind of like, oh, you were beloved. And so it's kind of pulling on my nostalgia, but also like, you're not Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, Beyonce, Taylor Swift. So people don't have as visceral of a reaction to them as far as oh, you're out of touch with me. Some of these people feel very like, you forget that they're rich and also have primary and secondary homes because they act so outlandish, just like a Trump does. So it's like a Sexy Red, even though now she's in a position where she's definitely making lots of money and she's on tour, she still reminds you of that around the way girl that you grew up with if you're a Black person in like a sort of like hood environment. And like Amber Rose is gonna, it doesn't have to make sense to those of us who are like, wait a second, but you fight against slut shaming and sexual assault and all of those things. But she comes on stage and she puts on the performance very similar to the kind of performance that Trump gives. So I don't think the Democrats need to try and replicate that, because it's gonna be off, because that's not who Kamala Harris is. And so she's much more of a prim, put together stepmother and wife and longtime elected official. Donald Trump is the apprentice and this celebrity politician person. And so he can make these stunts and it kind of work in his favor. But with Kamala Harris, it will always feel like pandering. So I think we need to be wary of the way that it builds power for the Trump side without trying to replicate it on our side, because it's just not, it's going to backfire.
Right. So bottom line is, Democrats, great. Endorsements are great, but you got to be worried here. you got to take this seriously. Exactly. Thank you so much, Brea, for walking me through this.
No, thanks so much for having me on the show. You're killing it.
Thank you. Oh, my God. I love the affirmations. Brea Baker writes for Refinery29 Unbothered. She's in Atlanta, and she was talking about celebrity endorsements and how they could affect the U.S. election. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, so now let's talk about a new film feeling all sorts of outpouring of love called Sing Sing.
Listen, I already know what you're doing, know who you are, what you about, bro. What? You don't get to tell me what I need in prison. You don't get to do that. And don't bring me in those dark corners no more.
The world expects brothers like you and I to walk in with our heads held down. Nah, what you gotta walk in like a king. Everything is yours.
That's a bit of the trailer for Sing Sing. It stars Oscar-nominated actor Coleman Domingo and centers on the true story of a group of inmates staging plays while serving time at the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Jackson Weaver and Sarah-Tai Black have seen it. They're here with me now and ready to talk about it. Jackson, Sarah-Tai, welcome back.
Hi. Oh, welcome to us. Thank you so much.
Listen, Jackson, very briefly, what else should people know about Sing Sing?
I mean, that it's a true story. I mean, I know we just went through the whole Baby Reindeer is a true story nightmare, but like this is pretty close to a real thing that happened, almost being like reenacted almost as a documentary. The program Rehabilitation Through the Arts is a real thing. Not only were a lot of these characters real people, like the person that Coleman Domingo plays, Divine G, being a real person, that guy is in the movie. He comes in a little cameo later on, but like other characters, Divine Eye, the kind of second biggest star, he's a real guy. And all of these prisoners who are in this prison program that are putting on a play to kind of work through issues that they have in their own lives, obviously being in prison, are real people who really work through these plays and are not just playing prisoners, they're playing themselves, their same names. And the kind of emotional catharsis that the movie gets across in a really stunning way is real emotional catharsis.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's worth mentioning, like, basically 80% of this cast is RTA alumni, as you were basically talking to, and also like that program, like we have similar programs like that here in Canada, right? Like inmate-led theater initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things the film touches on so well, that this is something that might make you a little bit trepidation to see if it's too much of a service more than a movie itself. But if we're just talking about that, this is a program and ostensibly really works well, not only in the States, in Canada. There's William on Head, I believe it's called, in BC. There's Shakespeare on Stage, I think the other one's called, in Winnipeg. There's a number of programs like this that are that they get these prisoners, people who are imprisoned for sometimes violent crimes, and give them space to act, to work through emotions, to get on stage, and the movie really touches on get in touch with something that's a little bit more vulnerable in them and to express themselves. And the movie kind of works as almost service journalism. It's a good movie, but it's just so astounding that, yeah, these programs really work. There are people really affected by that. And then in Sing Sing, these specific people you are seeing their faces on screen were the ones who were affected by it.
Yeah. And look, I mean, we can't speak too little about how uplifting a program like this is in terms of, like, leaning more restorative justice and carceral justice. And our colleague Eli at CBC, Eli Glasner, has produced a story on the programs here in Canada. So that's worth checking out if you have the time. Okay, Sarah-Tai, I mean, as mentioned, Sing Sing is based on this true story. And so I'm just curious, what's your take on how this story has been adapted for the big screen?
I mean, first of all, I love that this segment is being paired with a segment on Kamala Harris. I'm sure as an attorney general, she probably would have preferred cheap labor to these kind of restorative programs that this film is showing us. In terms of the movie, I kind of oscillate between wanting this to be a documentary with the same folks. No shade to Coleman, I love him. Or at the very least, like a little less narratively curated. There's a lot of emotive score here, which I think that we don't need. I think, I really like to sit with the characters, especially knowing these characters are the people themselves. I also think there's probably a lot of aspects of being incarcerated that directly affected the ability to take part in programs like this. Rad, I think about the interview you did with the cast last year for TIFF, where they were talking about how other program volunteers had to undergo strip searches to take part and join them in the prison, things like that. That said, I also did find it really refreshing to stick to this subjective point of view and kind of leaving out the more violent or oppressive aspects of being incarcerated, for better and for worse. We don't see a single prison guard, for example, and we're focusing solely on these men finding this space and moment of freedom. So yeah, I'm kind of torn between those two poles of thinking. Maybe the answer for me is somewhere in between those.
I feel that tension. I feel anytime they seem to be trying to conjure a story, felt like it was it wasn't as raw as just when you're just seeing these guys in basically what's it called, improvise and all that kind of stuff, right? But yeah, so now Jackson, look, you went into this film with some trepidation of your own about how it might tackle the interplay between Black masculinity and homophobia and the arts. What did you come out of Sing Sing feeling?
Yeah, I kind of spoke to that earlier, where you can have an amazing message in a movie, and that does not mean the movie is good by any stretch. Sometimes it can definitely undercut it. But one thing that I think that this did well, that something that is a little saccharine might not do as well. I'm not directly mentioning Green Book or Rustin, but those kinds of movies maybe, where this does not present objectively in your face the main purpose being, I don't know how I can get over the difficulty of being a man in theater. I don't know how I can express myself, and I'm finally turning the corner. There is one character that grapples with that a little bit in the first maybe third of the movie, but the movie is not taken from the get-go of the problem is men cannot express themselves, and the suggestion being that we're not okay with that. It just posits a kind of contrast, a visual dichotomy or a metaphorical dichotomy where you have inmates, some real former inmates who are walking around a room pretending to be zombies, dressing up in a high priestess costume, or just like playing around, having fun on stage, issues that would undercut masculinity, obviously the hyper masculinity we expect to see in Black men, and obviously the ideas of what we expect to have homophobia foisted on it. But really the challenge is more in the audience. You're the one who's supposed to sit there or could sit there and think that this isn't what I would expect to see these types of people engaging in. The characters themselves, for the most part, do not care. They pass that hill far in the distance, which is one of the things that makes this film, I think, work for me, for not blending too far into the over-dramatized, oversimplistic.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, Sarah-Tai, before we talk about Colman Domingo's performance in this film, I mean, of course, he's the big starry marquee lead. I want to talk about his co-star, Clarence Divine Eye Macklin, as he's known. He's essentially playing a version of his younger self, right? And I think, of course, it's kind of weird for us to be talking about, how good or bad was a performance where someone's playing a version of themselves, and how are we speaking to any authority on that? But here we are. So I'd love to know, what did you think of Clarence's performance?
I loved his performance. For me, he kind of outshone Colman a bit, especially as I went into the film already knowing that much of the cast was made up of formerly incarcerated men playing versions of themselves. For me, the beauty and the rawness of his performance is the draw of the film, alongside the rest of the cast playing versions of themselves. As a big Colman Domingo fan, I'm obsessed with him. You can see Colman Domingo work it out in literally any film he's in, but this is kind of a one shot opportunity, unless, I don't know, they make a sequel. But yeah, there's something very special here with Clarence's character, and the way that Black men here are being able to have ownership and autonomy and take an active part in telling their own stories.
Yeah. I mean, did we even talk about how they actually have producer credit on the storytelling, and they were all paid the same, basically, everyone. So there was a real equitable approach, I believe, to telling their stories. Sarah-Tai mentioned Colman. Jackson, I guess we'll take it away in terms of Colman Domingo's performance. I mean, look, this is his performance in Sing Sing. You mentioned his previous role as Bayard Rustin in Rustin, for which he got an Academy Award nomination. Do you think this performance, for Colman's performance in Sing Sing, will take him all the way, will get him that other Oscar nomination?
I mean, his performance in Rustin as like an atomized thing to look at was fantastic. I just didn't like the story so much around it, or the way it was told. This is, by no stretch of the imagination is it far behind his performance in Rustin. This is so unselfish of an actor. His character is kind of feeling a little put out as the former big dog when Divine G comes in and when Divine I comes in rather, and kind of takes a place that he formerly held. But Colman Domingo's performance is just so artful and like delicate to allow Clarence to like come forward and really make himself the main character, which is impressive to me in how he's still able to get through so much of this nuance and so much of this heartbreak and so much of this backstory in a really delicate way. And in terms of an award, I think it just depends on what kind of buzz this film will make. It deserves all of the buzz. It's maybe not as widely accessible as something like Rustin is, which is actually to its credit, in my opinion. But does he deserve an award nomination for this as much as Rustin? 100,000,000,000% yes.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. I 100% agree. And I'd also say, like, in terms of the distinction between these two performances and, like, kind of the different levels they're working at, what was great is, Sarah-Tai, you mentioned that I interviewed them last year for the Globe and Mail. Seeing them interact with each other in the same room, that love was real. Like, these guys really have that admiration for each other. But so we got to leave it there. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so Sarah-Tai Black is a film and culture critic based in Toronto, and Jackson Weaver is an entertainment writer here at CBC. Sing Sing is in select theaters now, expanding wide next week, and Clarence Macklin, who stars in Sing Sing, will be on cue tomorrow. And that's it for the podcast today. And hey, while you're listening to this, don't forget to give us a follow on Instagram. We're at Commotion CBC. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud. See you tomorrow.